Noise musicians really go, okay, that's music, this is music, yep, it's sounding good, yep. Hello everybody, welcome back to A Rough Guide. I'm your host Alex, and today we're going to be diving into the subsection of noise music, and probably the most influential portion of noise music, the Japanese noise scene. Also colloquially known as Japanoise, there are a lot of people that dispute whether or not this genre should be considered a real genre, and there have been reports of different people within the niche itself saying that they don't really want to be classified as that, solely because they want to be seen as contributors to the overall noise scene and movements as opposed to just Japanese noise artists. But there are some key differences in both the artistic movement, their expression, and the influence that they had on countless noise musicians and bands that would come after them that I think it's worthy enough to talk about in its own right. Just to sort of get a little bit of a base plate before we eventually do an episode on noise music. Tetsuro Yamasuka, Kaiji Haino, as well as merzbow are people that are associated with this niche and some of the key contributors, but there are plenty of Japanese noise artists. Hijo Kaiden, the CCCC, Incapacitants, the Incapacitants, as well as Melt Banana being a recent addition to the fold. There are plenty of people that are within this wonderful niche. Noise music pretty much has been experimented with ever since the 60s and the 70s. You look at stuff from like Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground, they were testing out the waters when it came to noise, and even since like the early to mid 60s, bands were trying to trailblaze and projects were trying to trailblaze in the sense of individualism and testing the limits of what could be considered music and not music, and testing those boundaries of what could be conceptually considered a musical outlet. Because most of the time, the classical way that you would define music is something with rhythm or harmony, something with vocals, or an instrumental that is melodic or harmonious or has some sort of scale to it, some sort of pattern to it. You can define it any way you want, but noise musicians, specifically Japanoise artists, wanted that free expression and wanted to challenge the conventional norms of music in such a way that it can be labeled as non-music, with many of their compositions ringing out in these droning fashions, testing so many different types of whirligigs, bits and bobs in so many different facets, creating something in the process that is anything but typical and completely just atonal most of the time. And one thing that is true of Japanoise artists, and to a greater extent other noise artists just anywhere, but mostly Japanoise artists really like to do improv. They like to free improv it. And whereas a lot of noise artists wanted to basically say fuck you to conventional music, Japanoise artists took it to the next level and often employed things like washing machines, dishwashers, fans, just anything that they could find, clanging pots and pans, metallic objects, making their compositions mechanical and engineered and ferocious, manufacturing these sounds out of thin air. And some of them also play around with like power noise, some of them play around with more electronic instrumentation and the usage of digital stuff, but that mostly came later in the 80s and 90s and forward. But everything about it was intended to offend, and there's a big difference between Japanoise and a lot of what American and European noise rock and noise metal bands were doing in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. They were challenging conventional norms in their own way, but they still had patterns to their playing. They still had some sort of tone to what they were doing. Japanoise artists are here to offend. They are here to push the envelope and take it above and beyond to make something that is freely expressing itself, not really in a musical avenue, and it's up to you whether you decide if that is something that can be considered music or not. There's certainly a lot of time and effort put into it if you watch a live performance from any of these people. And Japanoise inspired so many genres that would come after it, taking so many of the noisy ideas and the distorted ideas that these bands and these artists toyed around with and including them in their own sound, fine-tweaking them and making them a little bit more intelligible, a little bit more palatable. I go so far as to say that a project like merzbow has tremendously inspired many metal bands that have come after it by testing the limits of noise, distortion, feedback, just how loud you could make something. before the loudness war existed, these projects were really making a wave. And another genre that Japanoise would go on to influence would be like the harsh noise scene. And harsh noise is a lot different than noise music, because noise music can at least be tangible a lot of times. Harsh noise is genuinely just there to try to scrape your ears out on the concrete until you're just this puddle of goo. It's supposed to hurt, it's supposed to be over the top, it's supposed to go against the grain of everything that you would perceive as normal in music, in the formula, whatever movement you want to say. It is the sharpest contrast to most music, and the way it has this individualism is fantastic in my personal opinion. And even though I don't go out of my way to listen to like noise music that regularly on its own, it's impossible to deny the influence that it had, not only on noise music, but on so many bands that would come later, as well as the harsh noise and power noise scenes. And the best part about this is, even before like the Velvet Underground were really hitting their stride and these bands in the 60s and 70s were pushing the envelope, you had a project like Group Ongaku, which they started, I believe, around like the 1957, 1958 area, and they were these improvisational artists that took everyday instruments, they used ethnic instruments and a ton of different digital things that were very, very spanking new at that time, and transformed that technology and everyday objects into something that was really unheard of in that scene. So in many ways, the noise scene as we know it, even though we attribute a lot of American and European artists to being the trailblazers, there are projects that date back before that in Japan. And it's one of those cases where a specific part of the world will influence so much that comes after it, kind of like the Florida death metal scene. Ultimately though, I want to get your guys' opinions on Japanoise and the concept of it. Do you believe it's true music? Do you believe it has its credibility? Is it not your cup of tea, or do you still respect it? Let me know down in the comment section below. I know this is a divisive genre, so I want to hear what you guys think of it. Be sure to let me know down below. We can have a little conversation about it. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.